So this video lecture is about George Bernard Shaw's play, Mrs. Warren's Profession. So Bernard Shaw was one of the two great Irish playwrights of the 1890s, late 19th century, Victorian era. The other being Oscar Wilde, who's The Importance of Being Earnest we read for week 3. George Bernard Shaw was an incredibly important playwright because he brings modern drama to England. So what I mean by that in sort of drama history terms is modern drama is basically invented by a Norwegian playwright named Henrik Ibsen. Ibsen writes in the 1840s through the 1860s, and what characterizes his work is that he breaks with these traditions of melodrama and sort of vaudeville or dance hall kinds of performances that had characterized theater since the early 1700s. So Ibsen establishes realist drama, so he's portraying the world as he sees it really existing, and he establishes didactic drama. Now what I mean by that is that he stages competing social ideas, competing political philosophies, political ideas, social ideas, religious ideas, economic ideas. He stages those ideas in dialogue with one another. So you have, say, one character who takes a certain position on women's rights, and another character who takes a different position, and they present their positions to one another over the course of this drama within a plot structure. Shaw is really the first British person to promote Ibsen's work in English. So Shaw early in his career works as a theater critic, and he more or less discovers Ibsen for a British theater-going public. And he says, this guy is a genius. And so when Shaw starts writing his own plays, he picks up on this Ibsenian style. And what he does that complicates and adds to what Ibsen is already doing is Shaw adds to it a characteristically Irish wit and humor that builds satire into the plays. Whereas Ibsen, while he can be funny, Ibsen tends to be more serious and more sort of polemic about things. Which is not to say that Shaw doesn't have his polemical moments, because he certainly does. And actually one of the most important of those polemical moments is in Mrs. Warren's Profession, near the end of Act 2. So starting on page 1804, and really going through the end of 1807, we get this sort of fantastic modern drama exchange, in the sense of this exchange characteristic of Ibsen's work. So this would be the section at the end of Act 2 where Mrs. Warren is explaining her history and is explaining the circumstances of her childhood. So she grew up in poverty. They didn't have any particular opportunities or anything like this. And so, and I mean, one of the things that we get, one of the really important sort of notes here is the story of what happened to Mrs. Warren's half-sister. So this would be bottom of 1804 to top of 1805 here. She says of one of her half-sisters, one of them worked in a white lead factory 12 hours a day for 9 shillings a week until she died of lead poisoning. She only expected to get her hands a little paralyzed, but she died. This is the sort of working conditions of the poor, the laboring class of Victorian Britain. And this is this is the thing that terrifies Kitty Warren as a young woman. Um, so this idea, and I mean, and the remarkable thing about this is this line, she only expected to get her hands a little paralyzed. This notion that disfigurement is the norm for workers is something I think almost incomprehensible to many Americans today. But this was the way that workers sort of conceptualized their opportunities. And so instead, Mrs. Warren chooses to go with her sister Liz, who's become a prostitute, and comes back. And as she says here on 1805, Lizzie came into the bar where Kitty was working in a long fur cloak, elegant and comfortable, with a lot of sovereigns in her purse. So this is a way to make a tremendous amount of money, as opposed to working in this factory, or working in the bar where Kitty Warren works. Prostitution represents an opportunity here. And this is of course one of the sort of major points of the social reform movement. And we get here on 1806 one of the thesis statements of the play, I think. So this is 3/4 of the way down. Mrs. Warren says, "I always thought that oughtn't to be. It can't be right, Vivie, that there shouldn't be more opportunities for women. I stick to that. It's wrong." This is one of Shaw's polemical moments. This is where he is saying, here is a philosophical position, or here is a social position that I am taking and putting into the mouth of this character. In this case, the character of Mrs. Warren. This idea that the social problem is not prostitution in itself, it's that there are no opportunities for women to have productive employment, to earn money, and to live a comfortable life, unless they are already wealthy. So we have that. The opposite position of this, well, not the opposite position necessarily, but what's interesting and complicated about Shaw's play is that we do have a sort of didactic opposition, but it's not an opposition about whether or not prostitution is an acceptable option for poor women. That's simply accepted by virtually everyone in the play. Instead, what we have is a distinction over whether or not labor is in itself desirable. So we have, on the one hand, the Crofts philosophy, as Vivie calls it, on page 1827. And I've skipped ahead to Act 4 here, because this is where we really get this dynamic question played out. So on the one hand, we have this question of whether or not labor is a thing to be avoided, which is the Crofts philosophy, and that you should make money even if it involves exploiting people, and so on and so on. And Mrs. Warren says the way to get ahead is by exploiting people, and it is by doing what you want to do, regardless of what anyone says about it. And she gives us this on 1827. But she also says here, so this is 1826. Mrs. Warren says, "Vivie, do you know how rich I am?" And Vivie says, "I have no doubt you are very rich." Mrs. Warren, "But you don't know all that means. You're too young. It means a new dress every day. It means theaters and balls every night. It means having the pick of all the gentlemen in Europe at your feet. It means a lovely house and plenty of servants. It means the choicest of eating and drinking. It means everything you like, everything you want, everything you can think of. And what are you here? A mere drudge, toiling and moiling early and late for your bare living and 2 cheap dresses a year. Think it over." So we get here this sense that Mrs. Warren's position is actually about having material possessions, having material comfort. That's not what Vivi's position is. Vivi's position is dynamically opposed to that. And of course, Mrs. Warren is in a somewhat different position than Crofts, because Crofts is really this sort of truly vicious, lazy, self-indulgent figure. Mrs. Warren is more complicated than this. And I'll get to that in just a second, why she's more complicated. But Vivi represents the opposite of this. Vivi, again, is the new woman, and she represents this sort of 1890s drive among women to have purpose, to have utility. So she says here at the bottom of 1827, I know very well that fashionable morality is all a pretense, and that if I took your money and devoted the rest of my life to spending it fashionably, I might be as worthless and vicious as the silliest woman could possibly want to be, without having a word said to me about it. But I don't want to be worthless. This is the point, ultimately, for Vivi, is this desire to be useful and to have a productive trade. What complicates the didacticism of this, what complicates the ideological opposition here between Mrs. Warren and Vivi, is this section on 1828, because we see, or we find out, that Mrs. Warren's position is actually much closer to Vivi's than we might initially imagine. So Mrs. Warren says, so Vivi is upset, to contextualize this, Vivi is upset that Mrs. Warren has not given up her life of prostitution, even though she's now got money and comfort and all this. And Mrs. Warren says, imagine me in a cathedral town. Why, the very rooks in the trees would find me out, even if I could stand the dullness of it. I must have work and excitement, or I should go melancholy mad. And what else is there for me to do? The life suits me. I'm fit for it and not for anything else. If I didn't do it, somebody else would, so I don't do no real harm by it. And then it brings in money, and I like making money. And we get here, in the next piece of dialogue, Vivi realizing and presenting to us the similarities between her position and her mother's ultimately. She says, no, I am my mother's daughter. I am like you. I must have work and must make more money than I spend. But my work is not your work, and my way not your way. We must part. So, it's hard ultimately, I think, to figure out why they have to part at the end of the play. I mean, throughout the play there's plenty of opportunities for the reasons why they would have to part. But at the end of the play, when Vivi has said, we're actually the same, this is where it gets difficult to figure out why they need to part ways. And this is one of the great, interesting challenges of the play, of George Bernard Shaw's Mrs. Warren's Profession.